Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second class of Constellations for Individuals. We have a full group. We have a few people who said that they were not going to make it. Mahir and Peter both wrote and said they weren't going to be able to make it. I believe Thomas said that he might have a hard time making it this time. He didn't actually confirm that, but he talked about how that might be difficult. We haven't seen Jade yet, and hopefully she'll come later. And we just lost Nicole, and maybe she'll be back soon. And Anna Maria, hopefully you can hear us, but hopefully we'll be able to see and hear you eventually. And Anna Maria, if this doesn't work out, remember to call in on that phone number that's in the email. Then at least you can come in by audio.
Can you hear me?
It would prevent you from being able to see the slideshow that I'm going to give as usual. But the good news is audio will work fine with the exercises we're going to do tonight, which are not going to require, whoop, there she went, are not going to require visuals today. So I want to just start out very briefly. Oh, and the final thing is just to, I think everyone here already heard me say, welcome to Judy Wallace from Colorado. You know, if you want to unmute for a second and just go, hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Judy.
And so glad to have you. Judy, just say a word. Where do you come from? What do you want to get from the class?
Yeah, I'm near Boulder, Colorado.
I can't hear you. You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
And we do see you now, Anna Maria.
Ellen can't hear you.
I can hear
either.
her. I can hear her.
Are you hearing each other?
Yes.
Let's try this.
I
Okay,
hear Judy.
earbuds are not working. Never mind. We won't use earbuds.
Okay, yeah. So we do hear Judy, and now we see Anna Maria.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent.
Good.
So Judy, where you're from and your interest in the class, just a few seconds.
Yeah, I live near Boulder, Colorado, and my interest is, it seems like it's important to know more about doing individual constellations. I really like to work with groups, but it's really hard to start out that way. And I want to learn the nuances of some of that. Like I listened to the recording for last week, and I've done some one-on-one constellations and I've used several modalities, but to actually stand in the position and look as if I'm facing the person instead of looking at the floor made a huge difference. So things like that, the little tips like that are really important, I think. So thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Glad to have you, Judy. And I know a lot of you know Judy, and a lot of you don't. So this is great. And Thomas, yay, Thomas is joining us. That's great. So I'm curious, how did the homework go? Doing a constellation for yourself, or any lingering questions or comments from the material on starting to do constellations with floor markers, basically the same as group constellations, just with you and a client, or any amazing shares, huge breakthroughs. Oh my God, I solved my whole life. I did a constellation for myself. Or any lingering questions about the material from last week. We won't be able to hear from everybody, but want to make sure we have a chance just to do a little check-in on that material or your experience with the homework or questions.
I'll start. I'm going to try and point my camera down at the floor so you can see these little gadgets. Do you see them?
Yeah.
I don't know what you'll see. Yeah, I actually can't seem to get them all in view. There's a lot of them, but the point is they've been moving all week. So I'll come in, or my dog's sitting between two, or one's been knocked over, or one's been, and I've just made all kinds of meaning out of it. It's kind of funny, but yeah, it's one of those ongoing ones on the floor.
Cool. And for me, that has some overlap with Michael Reddy's altar constellations, which we're not going to get into here because I'm not an expert on them. But it is another way to do them with an individual. which is to allow a constellation to unfold over days and weeks and months, in a sense. rather than, in a really focused way. Cool. Other questions or experiences from the material we did last week or your homework?
Yes, I can share something. I set up a really nice constellation. I just wanted to look at myself and my mom. It's always an interesting topic. And it really all kind of happened very differently than what I expected.
Good.
Yeah,
that means you are doing it right.
Yeah, I had something very different in my mind, and it really unfolded very, very much differently. And of course, I had a nice cry in between that, which I kind of could think that something was working, because at one point I really got very emotional with the outcome. It almost looked like I kind of got in touch with my inner child, like the small, like a child within me, which was something I never really experienced before. So yeah, very nice, very moving experience, very unexpected for sure.
Wonderful. I mean, this is really the gift of constellations, is, what in many modalities is called the third place. It's the point of view that we haven't been able to include yet, but it's the one that's really going to make the difference. Nice. Thanks, Simona. And Bonnie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I'm still very new to facilitating, and so doing the practice last week was a real challenge for me because I didn't feel very confident with that. So I, in our homework, was trying a little setup, and it just wasn't working very well. And I finally decided to just set that aside, and I did a little constellation with me and fear, and doing facilitating constellations work and some of the issues around that, and that was very helpful. Had some good movement with that, and it felt really good. And I would agree with Judy, the visualizing that being a person standing there as opposed to the written thing on the floor made a big difference in how well I was able to connect in with that. So that was my experience. Thank you.
Good job. I've done plenty of constellations with others, but on my own, trying to do a little constellation, and I'm not whatever. And so the way to move forward is to bring in a card for the right? Whatever it is, the confusion, the block, the I don't want to do this, the I can't, I'm doing it wrong, or whatever the sliver of meaning you have about why it's not working. And it's always inevitably the important element. So I'm so glad you did that. 5 stars to Bonnie for thinking of that. Yay. And yes, we're going to run into issues as we grow in our practice, right? Whatever you're trying to learn, whether it's oil painting or horseback riding or facilitating, you're going to run into your blocks, which is the nice thing about family constellations is we have a tool to actually support our growth in our facilitation. Yeah, nice. Nicely done. Yeah, Tanya.
So I also did a couple actually constellations for myself, but what I noticed, what I want to share is I kind of observed myself, what I'm doing and how I'm doing and what the challenge is for me personally. And for me, the challenge was that I'm doing some things very quickly. It's like I'm jumping from one representative to another very quickly. So I'm already in a step on another representative, and I'm still feeling the one that I just was in. That's first thing. So I'm kind of need to separate those, or do like step in between or something, or have some practice to take one hat and put another, or something like that, that I'm kind of learning how to do. And the second thing is also, because I feel so many things at the moment and I want to move already, I forgot sometimes to check in with other representatives on the floor. So because it's just me, so I'm kind of want to jump, and I see already this, so I'm kind of stepping back and going slow. So this is my personal challenge. That's what I noticed. I don't know.
Beautiful,
Maybe.
Tanya. And actually, you're anticipating part of the topic for today, which is you're demonstrating your learning as a facilitator by observing yourself while you're facilitating, right? So I could have given you all the tip, didn't occur to me, that it's very useful to step off of a card rather than straight onto another card. This is something I've learned by observing, that you actually want to go back to neutral before you go into another role.
Yeah.
But Tanya figured that out for herself by observing and watching herself. So now you all have the tip because of Tanya's learning and my remembering to share it with you. And you have that, but you're going to learn, those yourselves as you go along and observe yourself and notice, wow, this is not working, or I'm getting confusing information, or I wonder what happens if I don't walk from one card to another. That kind of thing. And some people need more time neutralizing between representatives. I can move quite quickly, but just after years of experience. But despite that, I always go back to neutral. I never just go from mom to dad or whatever. If they're standing right next to each other, it's convenient. I can just step right over, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go to neutral and then step into the next role. It's almost a ritual for me now. That's part of respecting the autonomy and separation of the roles in some way. Thanks, Tanya. That's great. And I want you to keep sharing those kinds of things that you're learning about facilitating as you're going along. That's really useful for everybody. Other questions or comments? Ruth, we'll go to Ruth.
Well, I had a little challenge with the fact that it's my constellation, because then it's really personal, and so I'm kind of lost in the constellation. I was feeling actually really comfortable in when I was representing myself. It was blind, but then I found comfort in that, and comfortable in I finally found a place where everybody's was arranged where it felt most comfortable for everybody. I kept stepping in and out of all the different roles, and I had this this idea that, well, being my own constellation, I shouldn't analyze it, and so I thought, okay, that doesn't play well, because I realized with shock afterwards that because I actually did start to kind of like analyze it a little bit on paper, and just like a little football play chart, and I realized, oh my God, it's not following the correct orders of love, and it was really shocking to me that I was actually comfortable there, where it was like my daughter was behind me supporting me rather than the other way around. Mm-hmm. Which is how it is, but I just didn't, it was shocking to find out that I didn't notice that as representing myself. I didn't feel any discomfort.
Of course not.
And then the other question I have is, yeah, right. Yeah, because I was kind of lost in it.
But by the way, I just want to say, that's why when the issue is important, we're not great at carrying the constellation to a resolution for ourselves, mm-hmm. because we're not at a deep level objective about the outcome. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that everything that you did wasn't super useful for you. Yeah. So sorry.
Well, so one other little question though is like, okay, I had gone through two, kind of representing twice and checking out the relationships. And then I thought, well, I feel like, some figures want to move around. And so it's kind of weird to pick them up after I've gotten used to actually looking at them as full bodies, then pick them up and carry them around with me. But I guess in a sense, then I'm that body. Yeah. But so that's what you do, is you just pick it up and carry it around and keep going until you feel comfortable somewhere, and then you put it down. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess the way I think about it, I've never taken the time to think it out, but I guess I'm not thinking about the card as representing the role. It's the vehicle for the space occupying the role, I guess, in a way. Just like when we give the card to a person in a constellation, a group constellation, the person is representing it, not just the card. So, but yes, that's exactly what I do. Thank you. One more. I noticed, Lynn, you had your hand up, and then we'll move into the material. No, Lynn? Okay, Judy, real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was interesting because I did one just today, of course, and I really care about a lot of really larger systemic issues. So I put myself in the constellation, and I had African American ancestors, white European ancestors, and racial injustice. And as it moved a bit and changed, the conversation turned out to really be between African American ancestors and the white ancestors. And the white ancestors thought I was going to fix everything for them. And I basically told them, no, it's not my job to do that for you. But the stronger word came from the African American ancestors. And at the end, they said to the white ancestors, when you do your healing work, grieve and feel the pain we have felt, racial injustice will lose its power as your fear turns into love. It was really beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting idea, doing a social issue constellation. Yeah, I was just wanting to do a constellation to figure out why my cat's barfing.
I figured I had to take an opportunity to work on the stuff I really like and want to work on.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. By the way, pet constellations, lots of people do this for their pets. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm going to move into the material for today. My apologies if I didn't get to everyone's questions, but I want to make sure we start moving into the material. I want to do just a quick reminder on, in addition to the agreement we have in the original email, about how this is kind of a short instructional course, without a whole lot of feedback on your own practice. And that we're a group with a lot of different levels, and to just be gracious in receiving each other's practice wherever they are. And that we invite us not to coach each other when we're in practices with each other, unless someone actively asks you for advice. And we're always permitted to give feedback to a partner that they did something that was just magical. That's always great. People always want to hear that. And if there's anything in an interaction that doesn't work for you, I'm going to ask you to bring that feedback to me, by email in some way. I do want to that's my job, to make sure you're going through this short course in a way that feels really good to you. Okay. Now, very briefly, I'm going to move into where are we? Share screen. Do a little share screen here. I just want to let you know, I didn't do this in the first class, but I want to do this in this one about what the upcoming topics are. And just briefly, if anyone, you can do this by email later if you think of it later, but if anyone has some thoughts about wait a second, Leslie, aren't we including blah, blah, blah? To tell me there's something you'd like me to include. So today we're going to do constellation meditations. In future classes, we're going to talk about how to integrate family constellations with other modalities, you know, like conventional psychotherapy or NLP or other kinds of work. How to do them at a distance, phone or video. What are some of the issues you need to attend to when dealing with distance work? Constellations in the mind. These are constellations that are just like the ones you did with cards on the floor, only it's all inside the head. Working with figurines. And so I'm curious about what else I also have some ideas for like review topics like the orders of love that are not specifically about one-to-one topics. But is there anything else you would like us to address? Either, you know, content for individuals or any other constellation content. And I can't see everyone right now, so if you just have something you want to say about that, just start talking.
I would like to hear your taking on orders of love. You know, like I still have some doubts on that, so it'd be nice to hear from you.
So last week I went over the orders of love from my point of view. Is there something else that you would like me to say about that?
It's mainly the hierarchy.
Oh, a hierarchy of them.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little assignment, Anna Maria.
Uh-huh.
Would you be willing to email a little bit more precisely what your question about that is?
Sure.
And then I will figure out a good response for the group a little bit. And you might look at the PDF last time and just see if there's anything, you know, like I'm obviously missing from what I presented last time. Generally speaking, there is no hierarchy in the orders of love. There just isn't. The only one that I tend to think of as umbrella for all the others is the order of honoring and including what is. And in some sense, that's the first and last one. And then the belonging and seniority and all those things kind of come underneath that. But if you can email me your precise questions about that, I'll do my best to try and answer that in the class.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Other topics that people would like some review on or new material on. Anybody else? This feels like a good basic set of content for everybody. A little bit of nodding heads now that I have everybody back. Okay. Okay. And if you think of something after this class, like, oh my God, Leslie, I would really like to have someone explain blah, blah, blah. I've never understood this about family constellations. Email it to me and I'll see if it fits in the class. Okay. Okay, good. We're going to go.
Yes. Before you go, I would like to suggest something.
Sure.
Maybe after this class, if you want to do, it will be nice to have mastermind for family constellations. But more, I know Jack is doing one, but more for business. What I would like will be something more for us to discuss the, subjects on family constellations. You know, like to doubts we have when we lead one constellation. You know, things like this.
Cool.
I think great.
Yeah, I think that's, the combination of peer supervision. I know that Ruth
Yes.
and Lynn belong to a group that meets and studies together in a live context in Marin County. And peer supervision as well as kind of group study in a sense.
Yes.
Let's keep talking about that. That's, you know, if you're interested in that, I mean, this group exists because Ruth's group wanted it, and she wrote to me and she asked for it, and here it is. So again, if anybody, including you, Anna Maria, want to write to the whole class and make a proposal about next steps, let's talk about it and see what people want to do. I'd be delighted to have that. I really believe that peer supervision is important for this kind of work.
Yes.
I think it's actually part of our accountability system for growth. It's just often really hard to set up.
Yes. I feel kind of a need of that, because.
Okay. Let's keep that bug in our ear, Anna Maria. It's a really good idea. Let's keep talking about it.
All right.
Okay, good.
Just a word.
So I'm going to go back to your, sorry, someone else?
Oh, can I say something?
Sure.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to say our practice group is in San Rafael, California. And so if anybody's, we usually practice on Sundays, sometimes 3 to 5:30, somewhere around there. So if you can make any of those, or if you're at all close, please do. And then I think it'd be great to have a virtual practice group too. I think I could probably figure out how to organize one in my spare time. So, yeah. Okay. So
Excellent.
Anybody, yeah, we can just email each other, I guess. Okay.
Yes, you all have each other's emails by virtue of the fact that I do not blind CC you when I send out emails. I do that intentionally so that you can reach out to each other for exactly these. I mean, you have a potential set of colleagues here. And if anyone wants to go for it and make use of that, please do. Looks like there's a conversation at least between Ruth and Anna Maria, perhaps. Be awesome. Okay. So, and Jade's here. Excellent. Good to have you, Jade. Okay, so the review topic for today is what are facilitators doing? And this is a slightly, this is my, that drawer in the kitchen that you put all the odds and ends into. It's kind of that topic. But this seemed really important to me, and it's going to include a lot of tips that I think are useful for you. The first thing that I said before in response to, I think it was Tanya, is to be a learner, be a practitioner, in quotation marks, grow your craft. We often talk about learning organizations. So as problems arise, mistakes get made, it's in NLP, there's a saying, feedback, not failure. How to treat these kinds of experiences as feedback and opportunities to learn and grow. And I've just made a list of the top things to notice. The first one is to notice when you're going in and out of representing, intentionally or unintentionally. This is really important. So last week I was in a group constellation and the lights went funny and all of a sudden I felt like I was going to throw up. And I asked someone to come over and take whatever role I had just slipped into from me. And it turned out to be a critical role. If you're having intense anxiety, you're cranky with a client, you're trying to force things too hard, if you think somebody's to blame, if you're wanting to run and hide, at least experiment with the possibility you're in a representation. And then I also learned from Dan Booth Cohen that when you're stuck, you can kind of wander around a field in a group constellation or in an individual constellation and just see if you can feel a role. He's really brilliant at that. This is connected to the second bullet. Track your own experience, especially notice when you move out of neutrality. You could be in a role or there's something going on. And then, as I said last time, track the experience of the client. This is something I've only really started doing in a very intentional way. Checking in regularly. How are you doing? I'm interested especially in when they get more tense and when they relax. The client is almost always the best barometer in the room for how well the constellation is going. And I've just never heard anyone teach this, but it's something I've really been noticing lately. The fourth bullet on this slide is ask questions about the orders of love. And what I mean by that, in reference to you, Anna Maria, notice when things are out of order and how. You know, the child is being big and the parent is down on the floor. This is a fairly obvious one, right? I had a constellation last week where we only had 2 people in the constellation, and they kind of had each other's characteristics. Like something had swapped or inverted. These kinds of things. The person who leaves the circle. Okay, some more things to notice. This is something that I am always tracking. The second best barometer in the room is me. So I notice when things get more tense and less tense. And then I will often turn to the group and say, did everyone just get really anxious? And everyone will nod their heads. Notice when energy drops and when it increases. And I will often turn to the group and say things like, my God, this family, can you notice there's like no energy here? And they'll all nod their heads. And if you bring in a new representative and there's no reaction or there's a lot of reaction, right? The third bullet, you can notice when representatives assert innocence or righteousness. This is such a tell. This is really important. I remember the first time I noticed like there are maybe 6 representatives in the group, and 5 of them was really certain the 6th one was the bad guy. And I was pretty sure of it too. And that was the point when I realized that someone had been tagged with all the perpetrator and violation energy in the family. That's something that's really out of order. Now I'll just kind of name that. I'm going to say, you know what, this whole system has agreed it's his fault. I wonder if that's right. Notice patterns and repeated metaphors. So Mark Wolin is getting kind of famous these days for his core language approach. But he's not alone in this. For years, what I do with clients is just ask, okay, this thing with not having a boyfriend. If you had a metaphor for that, is that pushing a rock up a hill? Is it being taken over by a tidal wave? Is it you know, being put in a box? And then they'll say, no, it's like, you know, everybody died and I was left alone. Oh, that's really interesting. And then I'll notice in the constellation that someone's really alone or everyone's dead. That kind of thing. So notice patterns, repeated metaphors. Now this is really useful for you. These 2 are really connected, the next 2 bullets. And this really comes back to my first point again about being a learner. Because you don't know this when you start out. This is something you only feel as you do it over and over and over and over again. And it'll change over time as well. But to learn the difference between your own over-asserted versus appropriate authority and leadership and direction. So what I mean by that is the difference between when you want to push and force and make that child bow to her abusive mom and not let Ruth's daughter support her mom no matter what, and you know you're gonna like push and force because it's violating the orders of love. Yeah. And when you're feeling like in your weight and in your authority to, you know, very frequently as facilitators, you're gonna have to ask representatives to try something that's not coming naturally. But if you want to find out if by trying it, it's actually going to move something forward. And so you say, we're on the record here that you'd prefer not to say that. I'm going to ask you to just give it a try. That, and to stay in your authority about that. And you'll begin to track, and everybody does this a little differently, but to track the difference between when you're kind of pushing and, whatever version of that you do, that's the way I do mine. And when you're really in your weight. And then the other one, which is to learn the difference between your own over-asserted versus appropriate, quiet waiting and patience. My guess is that for some people, that's like the sort of waiting and hiding and not showing up fully, which is a little over-asserted, is the shadow side of the practitioner. For me, the shadow side is going a little too hard. Huh? But there are times of appropriate quiet waiting and patience. And to begin to feel the difference between when you're kind of going invisible because you're scared or whatever, and you don't want the responsibility or whatever it is, versus I'm just waiting here. I'm going to see what evolves. The second to last bullet is perhaps the most important of them all. When I figured out this was the PowerPoint in Constellations, everything changed for me. To welcome the moments of not knowing. In our culture, not knowing is a problem, right? In Constellations, that moment where you have no idea what's going on and you cannot figure out why that guy's on the ground and who that she even is and all this stuff, if you can really wait and inquire, this is when the field is almost certain to allow you to see, allow everyone to see the unexpected. Like, I think it was Simona was reporting on early on, the aspect of the relationship between her and her mother that she didn't expect going into the little constellation that she did. This is not easy because these moments of not knowing can feel like I'm a beginner and I don't know what I'm doing. And they can feel really similar. They're not exactly the same. It doesn't matter that you track the difference between those. Your beginner status and not knowing what to do will serve you in your ability to be okay with not knowing. And you will be a much more powerful facilitator as a result of this. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll open it up for some questions, is to just try things. This is another thing that is not often I've seen in trainings. You're supposed to know why you're doing, you're putting in dad because you know dad belongs, and you're putting in the dead uncle because you know the dead uncle belongs. But it is permissible to put something in or try something not knowing if it's going to be useful or not. Heinz Stark kind of taught me this stuff. When you don't know if the issue is related to the dead uncle in the Ukraine or the aborted child of mom, you're sort of thinking maybe one or the other. So you can write 2 cards with the names and you present them to the representative for the client and say, choose one, and they will choose one and you're off and running. I've never seen one of those. Heinz Stark called them tests. I found that really interesting, to just try tests. It's not what you want to do all the time, but I'm just trying stuff on a regular basis. So I'm going to stop the share and ask if there are any questions or thoughts about anything that I just shared. Lynn, unmute.
Yeah, this idea of someone leaving the parameters of the field, supposedly, it happened in a practice session we had yesterday. And I've seen you do it where you've let people do that. And I've heard of people like saying, get out of the room or go out into the parking lot. Or I'm just kind of wondering your thoughts around that. For me, in my role, it just felt like the right thing to do. I did not feel like part of the system, and it wasn't a bad thing. It actually was okay because I came up to the edge and I actually came back in eventually, but just what your thoughts are around leaving.
So in your question, I heard a couple of different things, a couple of different phenomena. The instinct of a representative to leave the circle, which is why it's so often useful to have a defined circle. Sometimes you're in such a small place, the four walls actually have to be the edge of the space, and then it gets harder to do that. But if you can have a circle inside the room, it can be helpful for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the first third of the constellation, which is about getting a sense for the meaning and structure of the system. And you can notice that the aborted sister leaves the circle, and the meaning is, I don't belong, or I don't want to belong, or I can't belong. There's a bunch of varieties of it. It would be better for everybody if I didn't belong. That will show itself up in what the representative says. And yes, 99.9% of the time, you really want those folks to come back because that's out of order, right? Back to Anna Maria's question, if they belong in the system, we want them back inside the circle by the end of the constellation. And the fact that they're outside the circle is part of the current disorderedness of the system.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to find an organic way, right? If you were in the role and you left and you eventually came back in, that's exactly what we want. That's the way we want it to happen. Best of all possible worlds. Now, the get out of the system thing, that's different. You mean the facilitator saying that?
Yeah, I've heard of that. I just wondered if that's something you've ever had experience.
Yeah, it's rare. It should be rare. Let me just share, there's a little bit of history. This is a really interesting book. I don't think I've finished it. But this was an early book of Bert Hellinger's called Farewell, Family Constellations with Descendants of Victims and Perpetrators. It's a very nice book, but it's old and it's a bit out of date. By the way, the part that I like about it is it has the sentences about at the end of a resolution, facing the dead, saying something like, I'm going to stay here for a while. Please look kindly upon me and I will join you eventually.
Yeah, that's nice.
Just stuff. It's filled with stuff like that. It's also really a lot about my father was in the SS. So it's pretty powerful stuff. It was really Bert's early work dealing with the Kriegskinder and the Jews who had directly suffered from World War II. It's a fascinating book. But early on, Bert asserted that if you murdered someone, your right to belong to the system ended. And his solution to that was to have them leave. And his assertion was that everyone would feel better. Schnee Victoria Schnabel, who's one of his very early students, actually talked about this at the Constellation Conference. You may have remembered her saying something about that in San Diego. She said, we started to notice that actually some of the people who were in the family didn't like that and wanted them to stay. And eventually that idea that the murderers lost the right to belong got dropped. And that everyone who belongs has a right to belong. And you don't lose the right to belonging to your family system, period. There are really only two instances where I have people leave. Where someone is so disturbing and disruptive to the system that as a temporary measure for the client's sake, we need to ask them to withdraw for a while. It's very rare, but you can kind of feel it when, say, the client's father was such a psychopath and tortured your client all through childhood. I mean, we're talking extreme situations that really all you can do is ask them, and the word is withdraw. And we can usually come to a place where the representative is willing to do that and everyone feels better. And you hold in your heart, this is part A. Like somewhere down the road, that's like you're still holding them as including and belonging. This is, kind of against some of the stuff out there about family. Bert will say you only need one family constellation and you should never have a second. I think this is absurd. I think that life is just a journey and we're all on it. And, even if we live to be 95. So that's one instance in which, and I hardly ever do it. It really is a Hail Mary move. I've tried everything else.
Would you ask the person to step out of the role or like?
Out of the room.
Out of the room, withdraw, like out of the
with the role. And then I tell them, drop the role. When you go outside, come back in.
Okay.
That's yourself. Before I answer your question, Simona, the second one, and I'm just going to name this because this is funky business. I had it last week and I do it twice a year, max. But every once in a while, there's something in a family system where the only explanation, it's a metaphor that I can work with is that there's an entity in the system. And many of you may not work with this metaphorical worldview, which is just fine. You don't have to buy it. But after a process of really dealing with all that, we'll ask the entity to leave. And that's usually because it doesn't belong. It actually doesn't belong in the system. And by the time we get to that point, that feels like the good thing to everybody, including the entity. I just name that because it's an absolute outlier. And if you're like, I don't believe in entities, that's fine. I'm not going to force you to believe in entities. But that's the only time when I ask something to leave. Simona, you had a question.
I'm kind of more wanted to add something to this because it happened with one of my constellations that were done for my family when my grandfather had to step out of the room because when he was present, nobody wanted to say anything. Everybody was quiet and afraid to speak up. So it's, but over the set of couple of constellations, eventually, he could be included, but simply in that first one, it wasn't possible. I guess it was the only thing that was to make, because otherwise everybody was frozen, nobody would speak. So he was asked to leave the room. I don't know what he really did in his life to be able, that he created such atmosphere in the constellation, but eventually it got resolved over like three constellations.
Yeah, I mean, again, facilitator tricks are really different from person to person. I probably would have handled that differently because when I hear everyone silent in response to him, there's something about that I want to include. That's my instinct. And to find some creative way to figure out how to include it, like, maybe a role for the unspoken voice, or I don't know what it would be. But, for another facilitator, that's the approach. There is something else, of course, which is realizing a representative, you've brought in the brother and it's not part of the resolution that you're moving towards. And you just ask the person to drop the role and sit down because you've just decided the role isn't really relevant to the unfolding of the constellation. But that's different. That's a different thing. Yeah, thanks. Personally, I just, the having people leave thing really should be extreme, Hail Mary, nothing else working, because the order of love around belonging is very critical, and the family has tried to solve a lot of problems already by excluding people. So it's not generally our go-to in constellations. Oh, interesting. Ji Hyang has an article about entities and constellations. Cool, I'll take a look at that. Thank you. And Ellen, I have seen some usefulness in experiencing what happens when we leaves the system, get the model, the honor of leaving without obligations. Ellen, just say a word about that so I understand what you mean by that.
Yeah. So, for example, there is a leader who is retiring, or
Oh,
is
yes.
right, and or a consultant who sort of put himself a little too close to the system. So you get to see, or a product that they're thinking about discontinuing. So what happens to the system? And again, it's an experiment. What happens to the system when that leaves the system, that person or that role, or spin-offs, those kinds of things. I think, those are constructed systems, and they can be deconstructed without the
Right.
same rules around them.
Exactly. Yeah, I would imagine that would be used a lot more frequently for organizational constellations than family ones. Thank you for that reminder. That's great. Because in organizations, belonging is not permanent. That's the tip for everybody here. It's different than families. Unless you're a founder, in which case you're kind of permanently,
Or
energetically relevant.
you've been unfairly discarded, in which case you see them, they stand on the edge and they look in and they haven't really left, right? And so it's still useful to notice what you're talking about, if they're in or out of the system, but which way they're facing. They're still, they're sort of, their ghost is still there after they've left.
Cool. Any other quick responses? I do want to move us into our practice for the day after our short break. But anything else quick about, again, I'm going to send you the PDFs on what facilitators try to be noticing or tend to notice after a while of doing it. Tanya.
Just quick question, if it's quick, I don't know, about energy dropping in the constellation. You said to notice it, or if it's increasing, but what does it tell you, or say something about that?
That's a really good question, because noticing something in constellation doesn't necessarily mean there's a particular response or a particular meaning about that. Energy really low dropped in a system usually means there's where's the liveliness? Where's the aliveness of this system? And so it's just something I basically notice. And then when the energy starts to pick up, I can say, ooh, we're on the track of something here. Right? If I brought in an intervention and it stays really then it wasn't probably a useful intervention, the attempt for something. But even if someone starts to cry, or someone starts to be upset, I'm like, okay, we're on the track. So that's what I mean by that. Doesn't have a single response. And everyone in this group can tell the difference between we're kind of chill versus the system's doing this. There's kind of no life in it. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do, we're at 7:23. My time is 7:23, whatever yours is. 5 minutes to use the restroom. For my time, that would be 7:28. Please come on back. See you in a minute or two. Okay, 7:28. I hope everybody's within hearing distance. There's a bunch of videos still off, but I hope you can hear me. Okay. Okay, so our theme for the practice for tonight is constellation meditations. And we're going to start out with a demo. Okay. So I'm going to do, in the rest of the world calls these guided visualizations. Okay. But these are obviously in a systemic constellations framework. And they're meditations is what they are. In some ways, properly speaking, they're not constellations, although they do have some elements of allowing the field to bring you new information. And the way you do them is to make them as, even though they're generic, I'm doing it for a whole group right now, you can have elements that the person can customize. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of this right now. So find a nice, comfortable place for yourself. And by the way, I did one for you last time, the one about bringing in the lineages. That was one. Those of you who work with me a lot on my business calls, my monthly business calls, I'm always doing the ones with the ancestors on the bleachers. And so this is another version. I do these a lot. They're very powerful. And this is going to be on mothers and fathers and money. So strap yourself in, put on your seatbelt. And yet it's also going to be, it's going to be generic and personal. Whoa. Someone just hit screen share by mistake, I think.
Yeah, it was Lynn, it's you.
Lynn, yeah, you hit screen share by mistake somehow. If you could undo your screen share. There we go. You must have just clicked it by mistake. Don't worry about it. Okay, so everyone just find a quiet spot. Close your eyes. Find your center, return to yourself. And imagine yourself in a space and please imagine that somewhere in front of you appears a representation for money. So it's you and money. Just notice what that feels like. We can feel the feeling tone of any relationship. You and a person you're sitting next to on a bus, or you and your spouse. So what does it feel like to stand across from money? Without judgment, without having to change it, just with curiosity, what does it feel like right now? And now please bring in another representation, one for your father. So it's you and money and your father. And again, just notice what it feels like. Does it feel really comfortable and easy? Does it feel anxious or scary? And more important, notice where these three want to stand with each other. Does money run out of the room, so to speak? Do money and your father stand right next to each other? Do you and your father look at each other and ignore money? Just notice, again, without judgment, without having to change anything. Just notice what these three feel like together. And now, you're going to bring in a fourth representation. And this is a resource for your father. Now, please don't predetermine what this resource is. Just label it very neutrally, a resource for my father. And let the field manifest for this constellation a resource that really is good for your father. And notice what happens. In the system of you, money, and your father, when your father has a supportive resource. And notice how that feels now. And then, with respect, allow your father and his resource to kind of step aside a little bit, to kind of be on the side for a moment as you bring in your mother, a representative for your mother. So now it's you, money, and your mother. And notice what that's like. Where do the three of you stand with respect to each other? How does it feel to you? Again, without judgment or needing to change anything, just curiosity. What does it feel like with the three of you there? And then bring in a resource for your mother. Again, please don't predetermine what that resource is. Just label it a resource for my mother and allow the field to manifest for your mother a resource that would be good for her. You don't even need to know what it is the field is manifesting. Just let the field take care of that for you. And then notice what it's like for you, money, and your mother when your mother has this resource available to her. What's different? And then bring back your father with his resource. So it's your mother and your father and money and you. But it's a really resourced mother and father. And finally, with respect, allow the representatives for your mother and your father and their resources to withdraw. So it can just be you and money again, like when you started. But notice what may be different about you and money. If anything. The positions may be different, the relationship may feel different. And with that, just allow the imagery to disperse. Be with yourself a second and slowly come on back. And I do want to say that I probably, and again, Lynn, I think you just hit the, there we go. I probably went a little faster on that meditation than I normally would, just so that we could have more time for the practice that I'm going to be asking you to do. So if you do this kind of a meditation with a group or with an individual, you can, hold the silences a little longer than I probably did. And then there's just two things I want you to note about it before I ask for any questions or shares, and I go into a short lecture on how to put these together, some principles about how to put them together. One is that, this is something I created a couple of months ago for a workshop on money in business. So I had the theme of money, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with the group? And this is what I came up with. The second thing you'll notice is that for whatever reason at the time, I decided to go with the constellation insight of when our parents are supported and resourced, we tend to feel better. It's just a very, very common constellation observation. Rather than fixing the relationship between us and mother and father, we give mother and father something they didn't have, and then we can feel a bit better. And so that's the space we were working in. So any questions or shares about that little exercise? And then I'll go into a short lecture before sending you into groups. Did anybody have their life change? Nicole had her life change. Yay. What was the experience, Nicole?
You know, it's funny. I never really realized that my father was kind of stepped out of the system until we did that visualization.
Right.
And I've done a lot of work, so it's kind of interesting. I realized my mother was in his space and so that was interesting. But yeah, I think that was it was maybe a little life-changing just to be able to recognize that he had sort of stepped out of the system. But with the resource in there, I noticed it integrating a little bit. So it was good.
Yeah, this is a tidbit. So others, observations or questions about that?
My meditation, I had a nice metaphor. It was, the money was a tree. And when my father came in, the tree kind of wilted.
Okay.
Yeah, but then when his resource came, and then the tree become happy again. Yes. And then with my mother, it was not much of a change with the tree, but she was very attracted to the tree. And then with her resource, and then bringing my father with his resources together, the tree started to give fruits.
Nice.
Yeah, and it was very nice. It was full of kind of yellow reddish fruits, and it's in a lower phase. I mean, the lower side of the trees, I could go there and pick up the fruit. So it was a nice one.
So please notice, although this was generic for the whole group, there's spaces for it to get customized the way Ana Maria is describing, right? So I didn't mention trees, but that's what came up for her. Yeah, that's what you want to be able to create in these meditations is, and Nicole noticed something about the placing of her mother and father that, you know, I didn't say anything about that, but so there's room for it to be personal and a real constellation. Yeah, Tanya.
Well, two things for me was kind of challenging. When you said money, I immediately imagined money, which is just basically big.
That's fine.
So, and then you said representative, so I'm kind of trying to visualize the person representing the money, so that was a little bit challenging.
Okay.
Then the word resource, very generic for me. So it's a resource like money resource, I guess, what you meant, right? Or something that relate to money or not?
No, any resource. It can be, and this is something that, especially with a crowd that's not familiar with constellations, you can spend a little bit more time defining your terms. Mm-hmm. So you can, sometimes I will take some time to say, allow a representation of any kind, a symbol or a person for money to appear in front of you. That gives people freedom to choose. So it can be a pile of money. That's fine. On the resource, it can be anything, like anything that supports the person. So I could have said, to be more helpful, I could have said anything, an ancestor, a quality, a divine thing, an angel. But the reason why I don't want to say those things is because I really don't want to predetermine what the resource is. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of whatever your father needs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I could have done a better job at helping the meditators along. So feel free to go back to this and redo it later on and do the meditation again. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go into a brief lecture on this, and then we're going to do some work together. Okay. So I've made the first few points already. The fourth bullet is these are not the same as constellations in the mind, which I mentioned before. Those are one-to-one, and they're real constellations with representations that are in the mind. We're going to do that in an upcoming class. So these are not the same as that, even though they're both mental. They can be very general. I start out every group constellation with one of these meditations, and it's just basically about getting in touch with your ancestors a little bit. Or they can be focused on a topic like money or health. It's really important to maintain rapport. You need to be thinking about how to work with someone's map about family and parents and ancestors. Generic meditations can run aground when we try to force family constellations principles on people who aren't ready for them, like bow to your parents or all parents love their children. We understand what we mean when we say those things, but a crowd that's new to it, you can lose them. You can lose rapport with them instantly if you try to include something like that without building it up in some way. So set up the meditation well and generically with some basic family constellation principles in place. I didn't do that today because I kind of have a group that's primed. One of the things that I do that a lot of you know about is I'll just ask them to see a bunch of bleachers, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, 8, 16, 32, 64, or on a hillside or something like that. So they can just start out by seeing their ancestors and connecting with their tribe a little bit. For specific topics like money, think about the spots people may get snagged. For example, inviting people to be supported by parents who may have been abusive. You need to put in enough wording that makes room for people to make some choices to keep themselves safe and well in the meditation. One thing that I picked up from one of my teachers is sometimes, like if you want to have the ancestors behind you, remember, statistically, a lot of people got beat up by their parents. And you put mom and dad right behind them and you're going to set off their flight. So you can put a, like a plastic transparent barrier between them and their parents. And that'll usually let people relax a little bit, that kind of thing. You need to think about the places where some people could get snagged. If you want to introduce a sophisticated and difficult constellations idea, like children try to be bigger than their parents to help them, this is often like a very strange idea to people who are not exposed to constellations work. You really do need to take the time to walk them through it and help them understand it. Avoid generalizations that may not apply to everyone, like see what it's like to be with your brothers and sisters, because they might be an only child, right? Or notice how your ancestors chose to come to the United States when they might have been forced here via slavery, right? You want to be careful about generalizations. And for a new group, again, I violated this today. You can consider mostly not focusing on parents. This is something I learned from Dan Booth Cohen again. Parents are often triggering because we actually lived with them. You know? I mean, that's, as you know, when you start doing group constellations, the interactions between the client and their parents are almost always the hardest. You can like go to grandparents or further layers in the ancestry in your meditation. It's not about excluding the parents, it's just about not necessarily focusing on them. And I gave some good examples of this in this demo that I did. Try to include a few moments that make it possible for people to customize the experience for themselves so they're actually having a live constellation. For instance, you can invite them to manifest a resource, as I did, for a representation, anything that comes to them that feels good. Another one could be, you can invite them to notice ancestors who've experienced poverty and ask, is it on your father's side or your mother's side or both? How many rows back? Right? And everybody in the meditation is going to have a different answer to that, because the field is going to manifest it differently for them. For resolutions, you don't have to go for a resolution, but if you do, generally it's good to rely on some standards, like bowing to the ones who suffered and say, I honor the dignity of your fate. Please bless me as I choose another way. That's an extremely standard resolution that I use a lot in meditations. And always leave room for a different experience of the resolution. Here's just the kind of thing that I might include sometimes. Whatever your experience, notice that this is the family you belong to, and that somewhere there is some strength for you there. Whether that feels good or not so good to you now, allow yourself to begin to notice where you come from. And so I'm leaving room for people to even be having a negative experience and making that okay. Like, that's okay. So let me just ask if there are any questions before we move into the practice. It's actually not going to be a practice. It's going to be more of a brainstorming session in pairs. But any questions before we move into that? Did somebody raise their hand? And again, you're going to get all those PDFs. Yeah, Jade.
The thing that you said about the interaction between the client and their parents can be really triggering, and how that didn't seem to match what you did in your example, just because there wasn't an interaction between the parent and the child. It was more, there seems to be two big parts of, even within the guided visualization, of people actually having that experience of tuning into what it's like to be them in relation to something else, and attuning to their own experience, and that seems to be a big part of this. And the experience of actually having parents be supportively resourced is really, really huge. And doesn't seem to fall under the, like, resourced parents aren't triggering, but resourced parents aren't really what most people remember. And like the other part of that with the triggering thing is just on the trauma-informed side. I always leave space for the balance between being directive, but also letting them know that they have the choice as to how close, how far, and them noticing, and not. It's a matter of them reclaiming part of their own choice about their actions, and still having the balance of being directive enough for something to be guided at the same time.
I agree with everything.
A lot of mindfulness practices, it's like people are forcefully directed to focus on your breathing, where that's where all the bad stuff feels, you know. And so sorry,
I think that's really helpful. I mean, there are nuances beyond nuances. I'm gonna nuance what I said about parents. What I probably wouldn't do in the form of a group meditation is healing your relationship with your mother or your father. That's something that deserves kind of being one-on-one with someone, particularly if it turns out, I mean, a lot of us had neutral to great relationships with our parents, so don't get me wrong. But if there's something really traumatic there, I wouldn't want to do that in a generic thing. So the topic was money and not the relationship between your mother and father, although it has good benefit for those things. So I guess I'll sort of refocus what I said there. Thank you. That really helps me sort of be a little bit more specific about that. That's really
Good. So it's like the parents are there as side characters rather than the lead in that case.
Right. Yeah. Because, you know, if I try and heal the relationship with my mother, then I take on all the baggage of me and my mother. I go straight there with everything that goes on. I'm almost triggered before we've started. And it deserves more container than a generic meditation, I think. Yeah, good. Thank you for noticing that. I think that's more helpful. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you into pairs again. I invite some of you to take notes on this. I'm really sorry that I can't send you into groups and show you PDFs at the same time. Some of you may have great memories and you'll remember this, but I'm going to put you in pairs and I'm going to come around to you and give you a topic. And then you're going to brainstorm a meditation, like try and outline one. This is not about having something perfect, okay? And here's just some questions for you to consider. These are the white bullets as you're putting it together. What is your hope for resolution for the meditation? No, around money, I'm hoping that, you know, systemically something comes into better order around money for the listeners, right? What is the outline of the constellation? That's the basic brainstorming. What representatives do you want to include? What family constellation principles might you want to try and include? I've done money ones that were more about looking at I have a classic one. I put up the whole family, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 up on a hillside. And I invite people to notice the poverty and the wealth and the lost wealth and the money betrayals and all the different ways money can show up in the family. And then just bow to all of it. So it's more about, you know, leaving the suffering with the dead and being small in your family without necessarily saying that particular principle out loud, and receiving the blessing from the ones who've come before. In the money one, it was more about resourcing the parents so that you could have a better experience of money. What would be generic, and where might there be 1 or 2 or 3 really customizable spots? And what do you need to be careful about with maintaining rapport on this topic? What are the potential, you know, mines around this topic? Okay. Feel free to wordsmith, try bits out with each other, take notes. And here's just a sort of a process point. If one of you has more experience or opinions, please encourage your partner to brainstorm with you. You know who you are. I'm one of those people. I could easily take over a conversation with a pair. So just, you know, if you're the quieter one, try to speak up and have you both do this together. Plan to report back to the group a little bit. And if we have time, I'm not sure we will, one of you might try out a meditation for the rest of us. Okay? So this is basically not practice, it's brainstorming. It's trying to create something together. Any questions about that? Is the process clear? Any questions? Time? I'm going to try 20 minutes on this. If it's looking like it's not enough time, I'll give you to 8:25.
So
But 20 minutes is a lot of brainstorming time. Anna Maria?
we are going to do 2 meditations or 1?
Just one topic that you're going to brainstorm between the 2 of you.
I see.
Someone else got a question? Everyone clear on the steps? We're okay on that? Yeah, okay, good. So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms and then just wait for your assignment, okay? Because I don't know how you're all going to be broken out. Oh, wait, I have to figure out. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there's going to be one group with 3, which is fine with this one. 4 rooms, right? 4 rooms. No, 5 rooms. 3 rooms. No, 5 rooms. There we go. Got to do math.